They always said the shrine was alive, but in a place like that, where the moonlight could barely crawl through the tangled arms of ancient trees, and every whisper of wind sounded like a warning from the dead, it wasn't hard to believe such things. And though I had grown up hearing the same legend repeated by elders whose eyes carried entire lifetimes of fear, the words had always felt like a bedtime story meant to keep children from wandering too far. Until the night when the truth pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't breathe under. Starting earlier that evening when I had wandered into the old tea house, near the edge of the village, where an oil lamp flickered dimly above the heads of men whose backs had curved over decades of hard living, their voices hoarse from years of smoke and secrets, and I overheard them whispering again about the shrine, the forbidden one perched on the hill where the grass never grew quite right, its wooden torii gate leaning at a crooked angle as if it were too tired to stand guard anymore, and though their tones carried casualness, their eyes betrayed that deeper thing, that creeping dread you only see in people who've seen something they won't name. No one's allowed there after midnight, one of them muttered, his voice raspy, barely rising above the sound of the wind rattling the warped shutters, and another, older man with a face like cracked leather and hands stained from years of soil, slammed his cup down and said, "Not allowed? No one survives there after midnight, boy." And I must have looked too curious, because his gaze fixed on me with that cold, knowing glare, like he could see that dangerous combination of youth and defiance brewing inside me. And in that moment I remembered all the stories I had laughed off as a child, about travelers who vanished after daring each other to breach the threshold, their belongings later found scattered near the entrance, about strange lights flickering inside when the rest of the village slept, about the cries, oh, the cries that some swore they heard carried down the hill on certain nights, neither animal nor human, but something in between, something broken, something hungry. And the men began speaking of a girl named Hannah, one of our own, whose disappearance years ago had been quietly blamed on city life, on her running away. But their murmurs suggested something else entirely, that she had been foolish enough to go seeking answers beyond that gate. And I sat there, my tea growing cold, my pulse hammering as I pretended to look disinterested while every word burned into me. Because there's something intoxicating about being told you can't, especially when you've spent your whole life being told to stay small, stay safe, stay inside the lines. And by the time I stepped out into the night, the air smelled sharper, like the whole village had exhaled its fear into the fog. And though I didn't know it yet, a choice had already been made in me, a seed of rebellion planted with each whispered warning, pushing me toward that cursed place. And when I reached the fire pit where my friends gathered most evenings, I found them in their usual circle, throwing shadows across one another's faces as they laughed too loudly to keep the night at bay. And when I mentioned where I'd been, what I'd heard, the laughter died just a little, enough for me to notice, until one of them, Cato, whose smirk always masked his need to be the bravest in any room, leaned forward with that gleam in his eye and said, "So, are you finally going to stop hiding behind ghost stories and prove yourself?" And I knew what he meant before he said it, because we'd all danced around the dare before, testing each other with nervous jokes, none of us willing to take that final step. But now his words landed heavy, a challenge I couldn't ignore. "You want me to go?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended, and he grinned that wolfish grin. "Not want you need to. If you're not just another one of them." He gestured toward the cluster of houses, the villagers too scared to question anything, and I hated him for being right about the way his words hooked into me, dragging up that restless part of me that couldn't stand being caged by other people's fears. So I shrugged like it was nothing, though my heart pounded in my ears. Fine, I'll go, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt tonight. And that word seemed to hush even the forest for a moment, as if the very trees knew what I'd just committed to. And though one of the girls, Aiko, pleaded with me not to be stupid, her voice trembling with something that wasn't just concern, but the kind of terror that knows more than it should, I waved her off, trying to make it sound like bravado when really it was the only way I could keep myself from backing out. And, for the rest of the night, as the fire burned lower and my friend's chatter blurred into meaningless noise, my mind stayed fixed on that hill, that gate, that darkness that waited for me. And every step I took toward it later felt like walking willingly into the mouth of a beast I didn't understand, yet couldn't resist. My breath hitching as the village lights disappeared behind me, and the ground under my feet shifted from familiar dirt paths to wild, untamed earth. Every sound magnified the crunch of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of the shrine door I hadn't even touched yet, as though it already knew I was coming, as though it were calling me closer. The hours between my careless agreement and the approach to midnight stretched like lifetimes, each minute both dragging and rushing me towards something I couldn't fully name. And though I spent them pretending calm, laughing at Kato's empty boasts, staring blankly at the flames as my friends speculated what horrors might live beyond the shrine's gate inside, I felt the walls of my own chest closing in. My heart beat a drum that wouldn't quiet. And when the others eventually drifted home with the feigned casualness of people who didn't want to admit their fear, I stayed by the dying embers, the night pressing tighter until I was alone. The kind of alone that made the world hum in a way you can feel in your bones. And I thought for a moment of abandoning the dare, of retreating back to my small room and hiding beneath my thin blanket like a child. But something in me refused. Whether it was pride or curiosity, or that stubborn streak that had always gotten me into trouble, I couldn't tell. Only that the idea of being just another villager afraid, obedient, silent filled me with a worse dread than any ghost story ever could. So I rose, brushing ash from my knees, and started toward the hill where the shrine waited. The path a serpentine thing carved long before I was born, roots reaching across it like skeletal fingers trying to snare me, the wind whispering in tones too soft to parse yet too deliberate to ignore. And with every step the village disappeared, swallowed by the dense forest that had grown wild and unchecked for generations, its branches arching above like a cathedral of shadows, their swaying creaks a language I wished I couldn't almost understand. And I thought about the stories the elders told, how the shrine wasn't built but summoned, rising from the earth itself to keep something in or keep us out, and I wondered which was worse. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone, that each crunch of my boots over leaves and stones was echoed by something just out of sight, tracking me with patient malice. And when I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Kato playing some cruel trick or Aiko, unable to let me go alone, there was nothing, only the path, stretching back into a darkness that felt thicker than the air I was trying to breathe. And soon I began to hear them, faint at first, like fragments of an overheard dream, the whispers rising and falling with the wind, threading through the trees like threads of ice. And I stopped, squeezing my eyes shut, telling myself it was just the stories infecting my mind. But when I opened them, the gate was there, suddenly closer than it should have been, its crooked frame taller than I remembered, looming at the top of a staircase worn smooth by centuries of weather and grief. And I climbed slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if the earth itself resented my intrusion, until I stood before the torii. The paint long since bled away by time, leaving only splintered wood etched with strange carvings I couldn't decipher. And beyond it, the shrine itself, a squat building with a roof that sagged in the middle, yet exuded something that felt less like decay and more like slumber, like it was waiting for me. And the air here smelled different, thicker, metallic, like blood and incense, and though I told myself to stop, to turn around, to run, my hand lifted anyway, trembling as I touched the gate. The wood warm as though it had been alive not long ago, and for a moment I swore I heard it breathe, a deep, slow exhalation that made my own lungs seize. And I thought of Hannah, of all the nameless ones who had come here and never returned, their lives reduced to whispers at tea houses, and I wondered if they had felt this pull, this quiet command to step inside. And though my body screamed to flee, my feet carried me past the gate as the last sliver of moonlight disappeared behind a thick bank of clouds, plunging the world into a darkness so complete that for a moment I wasn't sure if I had closed my eyes. And then came the sound, a low, resonant creak as the shrine's door slowly opened on its own, welcoming or condemning me, I couldn't say. Only that the air grew colder as the darkness inside spilled out like a living thing, curling around my ankles, beckoning me forward, and I stood there at the threshold, my breath visible now in thin, frantic bursts, my hand hovering inches from the frame, knowing that the moment I crossed it, I would no longer be a boy playing at courage or a villager testing a story. I would be part of whatever truth lived in this place, a truth the others had been too afraid to face. But tonight, I would. The first thing that struck me as I stepped across the threshold was the silence. Not the natural kind of quiet you find in the dead of night, but an absolute, suffocating void that seemed to consume the sound of my own footsteps, a silence that wasn't empty but watchful. And as the door creaked wider on its ancient hinges as though pulled by unseen hands, I froze, my breath catching in my throat as my eyes tried to adjust to the interior, illuminated only by the faintest glow of moonlight seeping through the cracks in the warped wood. And the smell hit me then, a heavy mixture of rotting incense, and something sharp and metallic that reminded me too much of blood, and I wanted to turn back, to flee into the forest and never look back. But my feet wouldn't move, as though the shrine had wrapped invisible fingers around my ankles, rooting me to the spot, forcing me to look, to see the truth hidden inside. And as my vision cleared, I saw the walls first once painted with elaborate murals of deities and guardians, now faded into ghostly outlines, their faces warped into expressions that seemed to twist with the flicker of shadows, and beneath them, strange inscriptions carved directly into the wood, the grooves deep and raw as though etched by claws rather than tools. And I wanted to believe they were just old prayers, protective symbols meant to ward off evil, but they pulsed faintly in the dimness, like veins under skin, alive, shifting when I tried to look directly at them. And then I noticed the offerings, if you could call them, that lined up on the altar at the center, covered in a thick layer of dust yet arranged with unsettling precision. Rusted bowls filled with what might have once been coins, cracked ceramic figures with faces worn smooth, and at the very center, a mask, larger than the others, lacquer peeled away to reveal splintered wood beneath, its hollow eyes fixed directly on me no matter where I moved. And the longer I stared, the more it seemed to breathe with me, rising and falling in time with my chest, until I had to wrench my gaze away, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my body. And then came the sound, faint at first, like the sigh of an old house settling. But no, it was deeper, deliberate, a whisper, low and garbled, slipping between the cracks of the silence, threading into my ears in words I couldn't fully understand but felt rather than heard. A language older than the village, older than the forest, older than me. And though I couldn't translate it, the meaning was clear. Welcome, trespasser. And with that, the temperature dropped so sharply my skin prickled. Each exhale a thin ghost in front of me. And somewhere deep within the shrine came another sound. A slow dragging scrape, like something heavy moving across the floor. Deliberate, unhurried. As if whatever it was knew I wasn't going anywhere, and I should have run. I should have bolted back through that gate and never looked back. But instead, I found myself stepping deeper inside, drawn toward the altar as though on a leash. Each footfall muted yet vibrating up my legs, the wood groaning beneath my weight as though warning me I wasn't welcome. And when I reached the altar, I felt it a hum, faint but unmistakable, like a pulse coming from beneath the floorboards, and I knelt without thinking, my fingers brushing over the carvings, the grooves warm like freshly spilled blood. And suddenly the whispers grew louder, layered, countless voices overlapping in a cacophony of tones, some crying, some laughing, some begging, and I clamped my hands over my ears. But it didn't help. The sound came from inside my skull, burrowing into my mind like worms. And I wanted to scream, but my voice died in my throat, replaced by the urge to look down, to see what pulsed beneath the cracks in the floor. And I did, lowering my gaze to the gaps between the warped planks, and there it was, movement shifting, darkness like liquid shadow, writhing just out of sight. And in that moment I understood why no one came back from this place. Because the shrine wasn't just a building, it was a vessel, a cage for something that should never have been allowed to touch our world. Something that hated me for being there as much as it delighted in my presence. And the mask on the altar tilted slightly, impossibly, like a head cocked in amusement. And then I felt it, a hand, cold and wet, grabbing my ankle from beneath the floor, fingers too long, nails biting into my skin, and every instinct in me exploded, every cell screaming at me to run. But my body betrayed me, frozen as the whispers, sharpened into words I could finally understand, a chorus of them chanting one thing over and over, stay, and my vision blurred. The world spinning as if the shrine itself were swallowing me whole. And somewhere in the chaos, I thought I heard laughter, soft, feminine, familiar, and I knew then that Hannah had never left this place, that none of them had, and that if I didn't break free, neither would I. But even as terror surged through me like fire, there was another feeling, small but insidious, curling up in the corners of my mind. The thought that maybe I didn't want to leave. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was standing, staggering backward from the altar, my heel catching on warped wood as though the shrine itself wanted me to stay kneeling. And yet even with the floor groaning under me, the sensation of that icy hand still lingered. Phantom fingers clutching my ankle as though my skin remembered the touch, more than my mind could process. And for a moment I told myself it was my imagination, that I had finally broken under the weight of the stories. But the crimson welts already forming around my leg told me otherwise. Proof that something beneath those planks had claimed me. And when I tore my gaze away from the floor to look toward the door, thinking for the briefest, most desperate second that I could still escape, I found it gone, not closed, not ajar, but gone as if the very frame that had led me here had been swallowed whole, leaving behind nothing but unbroken walls. And panic ripped through me like an open wound, my heart thrashing against my ribs, my breath shallow as my eyes darted wildly, searching for another way out. But the shrine seemed to stretch larger than it had before, the corners folding away into darkness that no light could touch. The murals on the walls no longer still, but moving, subtly at first, like the paint had been caught in a breeze. Then more distinctly, the figures peeling themselves from the wood, their eyes black pits, their mouths stretched to wide as they whispered in unison. Voices layered with the same command I'd heard beneath the floor. "Stay." And I screamed, though the sound didn't leave my mouth, swallowed instantly by that oppressive silence that now roared louder than any noise. And then it appeared at first only as a shadow at the far end of the room, taller than the doorway had been, impossibly thin yet taking up all the space it occupied, its edges shifting like smoke trapped inside a jar. And then came the sound of it breathing, long, deliberate inhales that rattled the walls, shaking the dust loose from the beams above. And I wanted to run, but my legs refused, rooted once more as though the shrine had fused me to its rotting floor. And as it drifted closer, the air grew so cold it felt like needles pressing into my skin. Each exhale a plume of fog that froze and fell in flakes at my feet. And when it finally emerged from the shadows, I wished I had kept my eyes shut, because there are things the human mind isn't meant to hold, shapes that defy sense and yet burn themselves into you. And this guardian, if that word could even contain, it was one of them. Its body long and jointed like a marionette dangling from strings that weren't there. Its skin a lattice of writhing symbols like those carved into the walls, glowing faintly as though something beneath them was alive. Its face, or where a face should have been, hidden beneath a mask identical to the one on the altar, except this one was whole, uncracked. And yet as I looked at it, I felt an expression form behind it, not seen but felt, a kind of knowing grin. And it tilted its head in that same amused way the altar's mask had before, as though they shared one mind, one intention. And then it spoke not with its mouth, because I saw no mouth, but through every surface of the room, vibrating the wood beneath my feet, rattling my bones, the voice a cacophony of tones, old and young, male and female, human and not, all speaking one phrase that seared itself into my mind. "Why do you trespass?" And I wanted to answer, to explain that it was only a dare, only pride, only curiosity. But the words lodged in my throat, dying before they could escape, and the mask leaned closer, inches from my face now, so close I could see the faint etching of tears carved into its lacquer. And for a moment I felt something strange, not just terror but recognition, like I had been here before, like this thing had always known me, waited for me. And as its long fingers, too many for a human hand, reached out and hovered just above my chest, I felt it press not physically, but into my mind, and suddenly I wasn't in the shrine anymore. I was somewhere else, standing in a vast field of darkness, the ground a mirror reflecting a sky filled with faces, hundreds, thousands of them, crying out silently, mouths open in agony. And I understood then where the whispers had come from, that the shrine wasn't haunted by ghosts in the way we tell stories. It was them, all of them, trapped here, bound to this thing that fed on their defiance, their pain, their fear. And I felt myself slipping toward them, my body weightless, my mind unraveling as the faces stretched toward me, pulling me down. And just as I thought I would be swallowed by that endless sea of grief, the mask's voice filled my head again, softer now, almost tender. "You wanted to see. Now you will stay." And I snapped back to my body, gasping for air as though I'd been drowning, collapsing to my knees in front of the guardian as it towered over me, the symbols on its body pulsing brighter with every heartbeat, feeding off my terror, my surrender. And for the first time since I entered, I felt tears on my face, hot against the icy air, and I begged not out loud, because sound was useless here, but with every thought I had left to let me leave, to let me go back to the boy I had been before I touched that gate. But deep down, in the parts of me I never wanted to face, I knew the truth. There was no leaving, not really, because once you cross a threshold like this, you don't come back the same. If you come back at all, it moved closer without moving at all, a trick of the shrine's impossible geometry. One moment standing across the room and the next filling the entire space with its grotesque, stretched form, the air vibrating as though my very existence offended it, and yet I felt no malice in its presence, no simple hunger or blind rage, but something far worse, the cold intelligence of an ancient judge, one that had been passing sentences long before my people even named this land. And I wanted to scream at it, to curse it, to demand it release me. But my voice betrayed me again, my tongue heavy and useless. And instead I could only think, pouring desperate thoughts toward the thing, begging silently like a child bargaining with a nightmare, promising anything, everything, my pride, my memories, my very soul, if it would just let me walk back through the trees to where the world still made sense. But if it heard, it didn't care, because its mask tilted slightly, as if amused by my pleas, and then the symbols that lined its skin, those glowing, writhing characters I had tried not to see, began to slither free, peeling off its form like molten threads and floating toward me, wrapping around my arms and chest in spirals of burning light that felt heavier than chains, each one digging into my skin like hot wires. And I realized they weren't just words. They were names, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The names of those who had trespassed before me, those who had begged, just like I was begging now, their identities branded into the guardians being like tally marks. And as they touched me, I felt their memories crash into mine. In jagged fragments, Hannah screaming as the floor swallowed her whole. An old man weeping for his wife as he clawed at the door that no longer existed. A child curled up in the corner whispering prayers to gods that had abandoned them, and their terror wasn't separate from mine anymore. It was inside me, filling my veins with their hopelessness until I thought my mind would split. And that's when the mask leaned close again, close enough for me to see the cracks in its lacquer, and the faint twitching of something alive behind it. And the voice came, not layered this time, but singular, sharp as a blade. Do you want to leave? And for a heartbeat I felt hope so bright it hurt, nodding frantically as tears streamed down my face. And though my body still refused to move, my soul reached for that single word, that possibility, and then it laughed, tore what I understood as laughter, a hollow, rattling sound that came from everywhere and nowhere, shaking the shrine to its foundation. And the altar behind me split down the center, a jagged seam opening like a mouth, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward into an abyss that swallowed the dim moonlight whole. And the voice spoke again, then descend. And though every instinct I had screamed that this was no escape, that this was the final trap, I couldn't resist, because the alternative was staying here, bound to the floorboards like the others, slowly losing myself until I became another whisper in the guardian's chorus. So I stumbled forward, the burning threads pulling me toward the staircase, forcing my feet to move when my mind wanted to collapse. And as I reached the first step, the air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest like a deep sea current, each breath a battle. And I thought of my friends, of Cato's mocking grin, of Vico's trembling warnings, and wondered if they'd wake tomorrow to find me gone, my name added to the shrine's long list of fools. And part of me hoped they would come looking. But a darker part, one I barely recognized as my own, hoped they wouldn't, that they'd stay far away, because no one deserved to know what waited here. And with that final thought I began to descend, the steps creaking under my weight as The walls closed in, their carvings glowing brighter, the whispers now screaming. No longer words but pure sound, raw and unfiltered, a cacophony of rage and grief and laughter. And I knew then that the shrine wasn't just a building, it was a mouth, and I was walking willingly down its throat. The staircase seemed endless, a twisting spiral carved into the bowels of the earth. And with each step I felt myself shedding the world I knew, piece by piece, until the concept of outside felt like a distant dream, something I had imagined in another life. And the farther I descended, the less I could tell if the walls were stone or flesh, their uneven surfaces slick to the touch, pulsing faintly beneath my fingertips, as though the shrine itself had veins. And the air grew heavier, with every breath, thick and humid like I was breathing through wet cloth, carrying that same metallic tang I'd smelled upstairs but stronger now. So strong it coated my tongue until I could almost taste iron. And behind me the staircase had already disappeared, swallowed by the same darkness that lay ahead, leaving only forward, always forward. And as I went deeper, the whispers returned, louder now. No longer one voice or many, but all of them at once, layered and endless, rising and falling like waves in a storm. And though I tried to block them out, I couldn't, because they weren't in the air anymore, they were inside me, clawing at my thoughts, forcing memories into my head that weren't mine, faces and names and entire lifetimes of those who had come before me, each one breaking against me like glass, some begging for release, others welcoming me with twisted glee. And I stumbled, clutching the wall, trying to hold on to myself as my identity blurred at the edges. Because I wasn't just me anymore, I was them too, Hannah's terror burning behind my eyes, an old soldier's regrets weighing down my heart, a child's final sob echoing in my ears. And I understood now why no one came back. The shrine didn't just consume your body, it devoured who you were. And as that realization sank in, I felt the threads tighten around my arms and chest. Those glowing runes the guardian had bound to me, digging deeper into my skin, threading themselves through my flesh like hooks. And I screamed, but the sound came out wrong, warped, echoing back at me in a chorus of voices that weren't mine. And in that moment, I knew I was losing myself, and yet I kept walking, because some part of me still believed that at the end of these stairs there would be a door, a way out, some salvation for my foolishness. And finally, after what felt like hours or maybe only minutes, time had no meaning here, I saw light ahead, faint and sickly green, spilling from a doorway too narrow for comfort. And I crawled toward it, my legs shaking, my breath ragged. And when I stepped inside, I found myself in a vast chamber that shouldn't have been possible. Underground, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor a shallow pool of water that reflected the walls like a mirror. Except when I looked down, I didn't see my reflection, I saw the faces of the others. Thousands of them, staring back at me from beneath the surface, mouths moving in silent screams. And I stumbled back, nearly slipping, my pulse pounding as I scanned the room. But there was nothing else here, no doors, no exits. Just the pool, the faces, and in the center of it, rising from the water, a massive pillar carved with the same runes that had wrapped around me, glowing so brightly I had to shield my eyes. And then I heard it again, the voice, the guardian's voice. Though I couldn't see it now, speaking from everywhere at once. You wanted to leave. This is the way. And I fell to my knees, shaking my head, because I didn't understand. Because this wasn't a way out. This was a tomb, a prison, a place for the lost to drown in their sins. But the voice only grew louder. Give yourself. Leave your name. Leave your pain. Stay. and the runes on the pillar flared brighter, and the water rippled as the faces beneath pressed closer to the surface, their mouths opening wider as if inviting me in. And for a moment, I felt the strangest thing, a pull, deep and warm, promising peace, promising an end to the fear, the shame, the endless gnawing ache of being alive. And I understood why they stayed, why they didn't fight. Because the shrine wasn't just a curse, it was a release, and some twisted part of me wanted that. Wanted to let go, to let the water take me, to let my name burn away in the runes until I was no one and nothing. But then I remembered my mother's face, the one person who would grieve me, who would light incense for me every year and wonder why I had never come home. And that memory cut through the fog like a blade, and I screamed, thrashing against the invisible bonds, clawing at the runes on my skin until my fingernails split. Because I wasn't ready to die here. I wasn't ready to let this thing erase me. And for the first time since I entered, I felt anger not just at myself for being so stupid, but at the shrine, at the guardian, at whatever god or monster thought it had the right to claim me. And I shouted, my voice raw but mine, no. And the chamber trembled, the water roiling violently as the faces beneath shrieked in unison, their sound like shattering glass. And the pillar cracked, thin lines of darkness spreading through its surface. And for a moment I thought I had done something, broken something. But then the voice came again, no longer amused, no longer calm, but furious, deafening. Then you will be taken. And the water surged upward. Icy hands breaking the surface, clawing at my legs, dragging me toward the pillar. And I screamed again, this time not for release but for survival, digging my nails into the stone walls, kicking against the water as it swallowed me whole. And as my head went under, the last thing I saw was the runes burning brighter, the cracks widening, and behind them, something moving, something bigger than the shrine, bigger than the world, awakening because I had dared to say no. The water swallowed me whole before I could take a final breath, an icy tomb that gripped my body like the hands of the dead, pulling me downward into a darkness so absolute it felt alive. And though my lungs screamed for air, it was my mind that broke first, splintering under the weight of the voices that surged through me. No longer whispers but screams, thousands of them, filling every inch of my skull until I couldn't tell which ones belonged to me. And as the water dragged me deeper, I realized this wasn't water at all but something thicker, clinging to my skin like oil, seeping into my pores until I felt it in my veins, rewriting me from the inside out. And when I opened my eyes, there was no murk, no void, there was light, blinding and endless, a field of white stretching forever. And I stood in the middle of it, dry, unhurt. And for a moment I thought maybe I had died, that this was some afterlife, until I saw them. The faces, the ones from the water, now whole bodies walking toward me from every direction, men, women, children, their forms translucent, their eyes hollowed out like burned out stars, and though their mouths moved, I heard no sound, only the guardian's voice booming above them, above everything. You cannot leave. And I turned in every direction, searching for escape, but there was none. Only the endless horizon of these lost ones, each one reaching for me with hands that passed through my skin like mist, yet left behind a sting, a brand of their grief, their fear, their surrender. And I staggered backward, clutching my head as images crashed through me. Hannah kneeling at this very altar, her body breaking as she begged for mercy that never came. The soldier slicing his palms open and offering his blood to the shrine. A woman throwing herself willingly into the pool. to silence the voices in her head, and I understood now that this was what awaited me, to dissolve into this sea of the forgotten, to lose everything I was until I became another face for the next fool to see, another whisper to tempt them down the stairs. And I screamed, not in fear but in defiance, raw and guttural, because I couldn't bear it, couldn't bear the thought of being erased. And as if answering my rebellion, the white sky cracked, jagged black lines tearing through it as the light bled out, replaced by the oppressive darkness of the shrine, and I was back in the chamber, choking as I surfaced in the pool, coughing up that oily water that wasn't water, clawing at the edge until I dragged myself onto the cold stone floor, my body shaking, my vision swimming. And then I saw it, the guardian, no longer a shadow, no longer distant. It was here, massive and towering, its limbs unfolding in impossible angles as it stepped into the pool, its runes blazing like fire. And for the first time, it removed the mask, and I wished it hadn't, because there was no face beneath, only a void, a yawning black hole that pulled at everything around it, bending the air, bending me, threatening to pull me inside. And I couldn't look away, even as I felt myself unraveling at the edges, threads of my very being coming undone. And the voice came again, no longer calm, no longer mocking, but furious. You refused to give. You refused to stay. Then be nothing. And I felt myself lifting from the floor, not by its hands but by some unseen force, dragged toward that hollow face, my limbs flailing uselessly, my nails scraping stone as I screamed. And in that moment, I understood that the guardian wasn't punishing me. It wasn't even angry. It was cleansing me, stripping me of the illusion that I was something separate, something that could choose. And I felt my name slip from me first, as if spoken aloud, and then my memories followed, each one wrenched from me like a tooth. My mother's face, my friends by the fire, the feeling of sunlight on my skin, all of it sucked into that void as I flailed helplessly. And I wanted to fight, wanted to hold on to anything, but every struggle only unraveled me faster. And soon, I wasn't even sure what I was fighting for, who I was, why I had come. And just as I felt myself crossing that final threshold into nothingness, something inside me, small but unyielding, ignited a spark of stubborn, senseless humanity that refused to be devoured. And I reached for the pillar, not with my hands but with everything I had left. And the runes answered, flaring so brightly the void face recoiled, a shriek tearing through the chamber that made the water boil and the stone crack. And I fell, hard, gasping, my body mine again for however long I had left. And when I looked up, the guardian was no longer calm, no longer composed. It was splitting, its limbs thrashing, its runes unraveling as the chamber collapsed around us. And I realized then what I had done. I had broken its prison, or maybe its feeding ground. And whatever it was holding back or holding in was now free. And as the ceiling split and the floor gave way beneath me, I thought of all those faces, all those names, and wondered if I had doomed us all. The world fractured around me as the chamber convulsed like a living beast in its death throes, stone splitting with gunshot cracks that echoed endlessly, sending jagged shards raining from the ceiling. And I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the slick, black surface of the water-soaked floor, my legs trembling so violently I thought they would give out. But adrenaline, pure, animalistic terror kept me moving, kept me alive, as I bolted toward what I thought was the staircase, only to find it gone, swallowed into a writhing mass of darkness that now crawled up the walls like a living infection. And through the chaos I heard them, the voices of the lost, no longer whispers, no longer faint. They were screaming, shrieking in triumph, in fury, in hunger, as their faces surged out of the boiling pool like grotesque flowers blooming from black water, reaching for me with hands that clawed and tore, each touch burning like fire, each grasp dragging at my skin as if they wanted to peel me open and pull me down with them. And above it all was the guardian, or what remained of it, its body unraveling like thread, the glowing runes that had once bound it now bursting free in arcs of burning light that seared the air, its faceless void no longer still but swirling, expanding, as though the mask had been a prison for something far greater and far older than I had ever imagined, and I could feel it watching me not with eyes, but with the terrible, omniscient awareness of a thing that had consumed thousands of souls and was still hungry for more. And I ran, though there was nowhere to run, my feet splashing through the shallow water, sending ripples across the mirrored surface where the faces beneath followed my movements like predators tracking prey. And I screamed not for help, because no one could help me here, but for the sheer need to make noise, to prove I still existed, that I hadn't been swallowed completely yet. And the chamber's walls seemed to bend as I moved, the space folding in impossible ways, hallways opening where there had been none, only to collapse into dead ends that laughed at my desperation. And in that madness I realized the shrine wasn't just collapsing, it was reshaping itself, sealing me in, turning itself into my grave. And when I stumbled against one of the glowing pillars that had sprouted from the floor like jagged teeth, I felt the hum of its runes, not like before when they burned and bound me, but wild, unstable, like a broken heart, and I grabbed it, not because I had a plan, but because I needed something, anything, to hold onto as the world came apart. And the moment my fingers brushed its surface, the runes flared white-hot, and a wave of energy ripped through the chamber, throwing the faces back into the water and slamming me against the far wall, so hard I thought my spine had snapped. But the pain barely registered because I saw something then, through the cracks of reality itself, beyond the shrine, beyond this cursed place, a sliver of moonlight, faint and impossibly far, and I knew, with the kind of desperate certainty only dying people know, that it was an exit, or at least a chance, and I crawled toward it, dragging my useless legs, my fingers, scraping against stone until my nails split and bled, leaving streaks of red in my wake. But I didn't care, because that light was my last tether, my last promise that there was a world outside this nightmare. And as I clawed my way forward, the voices grew louder, angrier, their screams shaking the chamber as if they could collapse it entirely. And then the guardian lunged, not walking, not moving like anything human, but appearing one moment far away and the next towering over me, its void face now a vortex pulling everything toward it, debris, water, even the wailing spirits that had served it. And I felt its pull on me, too, my body lifting from the floor as I clawed desperately at the cracks in the stone, screaming as my feet left the ground, my body twisting painfully as the void dragged me toward it. And I thought, this is it. This is how it ends, not with defiance, not with escape, but as just another name etched into its skin, another voice screaming in the dark. But then I saw her, Hannah, standing in the vortex, her translucent face calm, her hollow eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the pull weakened, the screaming dulled, and I understood not in words, but in something deeper that she wasn't saving me. She was giving me a chance to do what she couldn't, and with the last strength I had, I kicked off the pillar, flinging myself toward the moonlight, my body crashing through collapsing beams, through clawing hands, through everything that wanted to keep me here, until I felt the cold night air slam into my lungs like salvation, and I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Crawling, staggering, running through the forest with no idea where I was going. Only that I had to keep moving before the shrine decided it wanted me back. And when I finally collapsed on the dirt path miles from where I had entered, gasping, sobbing, retching up that black water until my throat bled, I looked back once, just once, and saw the hill where the shrine stood, or where it had stood now, nothing but a hollow, silent clearing, as if it had swallowed itself whole, leaving no trace but the scars on my skin and the voices that still whispered in my head, promising they weren't done with me yet. I thought I had escaped, that the cold, sharp air brushing my skin and the gentle rustle of leaves beneath my feet were proof that the shrine's suffocating grip had finally loosened. But freedom, I soon realized, was a cruel illusion, a fragile veil barely masking the darkness that had seeped deep inside my soul and would never fully release me. Every step I took along the winding forest path was heavy with the weight of what I had left behind. The moonlight filtering weakly through the dense canopy, casting long, distorted shadows that no longer belonged merely to trees and stones, but seemed infused with restless, mournful spirits, shadows that whispered, beckoned, and haunted. Their presence a constant reminder that a piece of me was trapped forever within that cursed shrine. The voices never left. Instead, they nested deep within my mind, swirling like a storm, murmuring forgotten names, ancient curses, and fragmented memories that mingled with my own, their cold breath ghosting the nape of my neck, promising in every susurration that the shrine's hunger was infinite and unyielding, and that my escape had been merely a postponement of inevitable surrender. Beneath my ribs throbbed a dull, relentless ache, the pulsing heartbeat of something unseen but ever-present, echoing the faint glow of runes branded into my skin, faint lines now, but no less binding, a cruel reminder that the shrine's claim on me was etched in flesh and spirit alike. At times, when the night grew still and the world held its breath, I could almost hear the guardian's voice again, soft, insidious, and cruel, whispering from the shadows just beyond my sight, a haunting lullaby that wove itself into my dreams and waking hours alike, telling me I had not truly escaped, only delayed my fate, and that the day I faltered, the moment I let my guard slip, the shrine would reclaim me in full. In those moments, the world around me seemed to warp and dissolve, the familiar bleeding away to reveal a distorted landscape forged from memory and nightmare, where the faces from the dark waters shimmered at the edges of my vision, some pleading for release, others accusing, and some twisted with an eerie, compassionless smile that chilled me to the bone. I would close my eyes, desperate to shut them out, but the faces pressed ever closer, their icy breath whispering in my ear, and I knew that the shrine's reach was no longer confined to that forgotten place on the hill. It had fractured the walls between our world and its own shadowed realm, leaving a crack in my mind through which the lost souls could seep, mingling their sorrow, rage, and despair with my own until I could no longer discern where I ended and they began. Night after night, I fought these invasions of mind and spirit, battling the relentless tide of despair that threatened to drown me in oblivion. Each confrontation a struggle of will to cling to the fragile shards of my identity amid the crushing weight of the shrine's curse. Sometimes, in the dead hours before dawn, I would awaken in cold sweats, the silence broken by the faint creak of the shrine's door swinging open, phantom fingers brushing my skin, and the subtle, unrelenting tug to return to cross once more that threshold and complete the ritual I had dared to start, as if the shrine itself whispered seductively to the fractured parts of my soul that longed for the peace it promised, a peace born of surrender, silence, and endless night. I wondered, in the solitude of those haunted hours, if Hannah had felt the same. If in her final moment she had succumbed to the seductive calm beneath all things. The release from fear, from memory, from the unbearable burden of living, and, though I cursed her name for being the first to fall, the first to vanish without a trace, I also found in her shadowed memory a spark of strength, a quiet defiance that had somehow survived within me, a reason to fight the darkness that threatened to consume my very essence. Without that spark, I knew I would be just another whisper lost to the shrine's endless hunger, another face fading beneath its surface, trapped forever in the echoing pool of souls. And so I walk now, haunted but alive, bearing the curse, like a shadow cast by a light that never fully shines, knowing that some nights the shrine's call will grow too loud to ignore, that its tendrils will stretch through the cracks in reality to reach me, pulling at my soul with dark whispers and icy fingers. And I will have to fight once more to hold onto the light within me, to resist being swallowed again by the endless night, for freedom is no gift. It is a battle fought with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of defiance against the weight of oblivion. And the shrine's war for my soul has only just begun, an eternal conflict etched in the spaces between the living and the lost. Months had passed since that harrowing night, though time seemed to lose its meaning for me nowadays, melting into nights, memories bleeding and warping like watercolors in rain. And yet, despite every instinct screaming to flee forever, I found myself drawn back toward the place I had sworn to never see again. It was as if the shrine's curse had grown roots inside my mind, tightening with each passing moment, whispering promises of answers hidden deep beneath the twisted shadows of that ancient hill. My body was weaker, my spirit frayed, but that relentless pull was stronger, a quiet insistence I could not ignore. One evening, as twilight folded the village into soft darkness, I stood once more beneath the gnarled branches that framed the path leading up the hill, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the familiar chill crawling across. My skin told me that the boundary between worlds was thinning again. The village behind me seemed distant, a faded dream of safety I could no longer grasp. And ahead lay the shrine, silent, watchful, as if it had been waiting patiently for my return, its crooked torii gate etched with faint, glowing runes that pulsed like a heartbeat in the deepening gloom. My footsteps faltered as I approached, memories clawing at my mind, faces from the pool flickering at the edges of my vision, whispering warnings I could no longer ignore, but could not fully comprehend. And though the night was still, the shrine felt alive, breathing softly in the dark, a sleeping beast stirred by my presence. As I crossed beneath the gate, the temperature dropped sharply, a cold that seeped beneath my clothes and settled in my bones, and the faint glow of the runes cast eerie shadows that danced like phantoms across the cracked stone path. I paused, every nerve screaming, but the shrine had opened its mouth once more, inviting me inside, and I stepped through the familiar doorway. The scent of incense and blood thick in the air, and the silence inside was no longer empty but full of waiting, full of secrets whispered from cracked walls. And the altar stood as I remembered, the cracked ceremonial masks staring silently, watching, waiting, and beneath the floorboards, I could hear it, the faintest thrum of those ancient runes pulsing with life, reaching out to claim me once again. As I ventured deeper into the shrine's shadowed heart, the murals on the walls shimmered with spectral light, the figures twisting and moving, their hollow eyes following my every step, and the whispers swelled into a chorus, voices layered with sorrow, regret, and something darker, something like hunger. I reached the altar, the air thick with a tension that made my skin crawl, and from the shadows, a shape emerged, the guardian, or the fragment of what it once was, its form less defined. Wavering like smoke caught in a sudden breeze, the mask cracked and fractured, revealing glimpses of the void beneath. But also something new, something fragile and broken. A flicker of light that had not been there before. And for the first time since my ordeal began, I saw not just a monstrous jailer, but a creature bound, trapped itself, caught in the same endless cycle of hunger and despair. The guardian spoke, its voice no longer a roar but a whisper, a plea. Help me break the curse. And I felt a strange kinship then, a shared prison forged from centuries of pain and forgotten souls. And though fear still gripped me, I knew my journey was far from over, that to truly be free, I would have to confront not only the darkness within the shrine, but the darkness that now lived inside me. And so I took a breath, steadying the tremble in my hands, and prepared to step into the unknown. Once more, into the heart of the shrine's secret and the final battle for my soul. I moved cautiously deeper into the shrine's labyrinthine corridors, each step echoing softly against the cold, cracked stone floor that seemed almost to pulse beneath my feet, like the beating heart of some ancient, slumbering beast. The faint light from the glowing runes carved into the walls flickered and danced, casting shadows that writhed like restless spirits eager to claim me as their own. The murals, faded and peeling with age, transformed subtly as I walked past. Sorrowful faces twisted into expressions of rage and despair, their hollow, blackened eyes seeming to pierce my very soul. Their silent lamentations flooded my mind, whispers of forgotten names and untold betrayals slipping through the haze of my thoughts. Like poisonous serpents, I tried to steady my breath, to silence the growing chorus that clawed at my sanity. Yet the oppressive atmosphere pressed in relentlessly, squeezing the air from my lungs and chilling the blood in my veins. I forced myself forward, compelled by the guardian's soft, sorrowful voice that echoed faintly through the corridors like a fading prayer. Break the cycle. Free us both. The weight of those words settled heavily on my shoulders, a burden I could not refuse. For I understood in that moment that this was not merely a prison for lost souls, but a curse binding the guardian and every trapped spirit in an endless cycle of torment and despair. The shrine seemed alive, breathing with a slow, mournful rhythm as the air thickened, and the very walls appeared to exhale centuries of forgotten sorrow. My fingers trembled as I reached out to touch the fractured mask that rested upon a stone altar, its cracked lacquer revealing glimpses of the abyss beneath. And the moment my skin brushed its surface, a surge of energy pulsed through me, knocking the breath from my lungs and flooding my mind with visions of lives shattered by this place. A child's desperate prayers swallowed by darkness, an elder's broken promises lost to time. A young woman's final screams swallowed beneath cold waters. I gasped, staggering back against the stone wall as the shrine's whispered voices rose into a haunting crescendo, their cacophony of pain and longing threatening to overwhelm me. The guardian appeared then, a flickering shadow barely tethered to form, its once mighty presence diminished but no less terrifying. Its fractured mask tilted toward me, a silent plea shimmering in the depths of the void behind the cracks. And, despite the fear coiling tight in my chest, I felt an unexpected flicker of compassion, for this creature was as much a prisoner as I, bound by chains of sorrow and ancient magic. The runes that had once branded me now glowed erratically, responding to the guardian's lament and my presence. And the walls around us shimmered and twisted, the boundary between reality and nightmare dissolving into a swirling miasma of shadow and light. Time seemed to fracture. Moments stretched and folded as I realized the only path to freedom lay through the heart of the shrines cursed the source of its power, and pain hidden in the deepest, darkest chamber beyond these walls. Though terror gnawed relentlessly at my resolve, I could not turn back. The guardian's voice, fragile yet filled with desperation, urged me onward. Embrace the darkness to find the light. I steadied my trembling hands, swallowing the bitter taste of fear as I stepped forward toward the heavy stone door etched with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly beneath layers of grime. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, revealing a vast chamber shrouded in darkness that seemed to absorb the glow. From my trembling lantern, the air was thick and stagnant, scented with the acrid tang of decay and something metallic blood, perhaps, or rusted iron long left to rot. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, jagged and scarred by time, upon which rested an object I dared not immediately identify as small, intricately carved box adorned with the same glowing runes that marked my skin and the guardian's broken form. As I approached, the whispers faded to an eerie silence, as if the shrine itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a choice that would ripple through the ages. I knelt before the altar, hands shaking, and as I reached to lift the box, the chamber trembled, and the shadows around me stirred violently, twisting into the faces and forms of those lost souls, their eyes pleading for release, their voices rising in a desperate chorus. The weight of their sorrow settled on my chest, nearly suffocating, and yet, amid the despair, I felt a flicker of hope and understanding that the cycle could be broken. If I dared to carry their burden forward, to bear their pain and transform it into freedom. With a steadying breath, I lifted the box and felt a surge of energy course through me. A blinding light bursting from the runes, illuminating the chamber in pure radiance that chased away the shadows and stilled the restless spirits. The guardian's fractured mask shimmered and cracked further, light spilling from its void like dawn breaking across a dark horizon. I realized then that the shrine was not merely a place of torment, but a crucible, a test of courage and compassion. And that the true battle lay not in fleeing from darkness but in embracing it with open eyes and an unbroken spirit. As the chamber filled with blinding light, the faces of the lost smiled softly, their forms dissolving into the air like morning mist, finally free from their eternal prison. And I felt the runes on my skin cool and fade, their grip loosening. As the shrine's power waned, the path to the surface opened before me, bathed in warm sunlight. And though my body was weak and scarred, my spirit felt unburdened for the first time in months. Yet, as I stepped toward the light, a whisper lingered on the wind, faint but unmistakable, a promise or perhaps a warning, that the shrine's shadow would never truly leave me, and that the journey of redemption and struggle against the darkness was only beginning. The air inside the shrine thickened, almost tangible in its weight, pressing upon my chest with a suffocating grip that made every breath a struggle, while the flickering runes carved deep into the crumbling stone walls pulsed rhythmically, their faint light synchronizing with the pounding of my heart. Shadows slithered and danced at the edges of my vision, twisting into grotesque forms that seemed to reach out, their cold fingers grazing my skin and sending shivers racing down my spine, stirring long-buried fears and memories I thought I had buried beneath layers of denial. The ancient murals, peeling and cracked from centuries of neglect, began to shift and contort, their painted faces morphing from sorrowful to wrathful, the hollow black eyes locking onto mine with silent accusations, as if judging not just my presence but the very essence of my soul, questioning my right to challenge the fate that had claimed so many before me. In the center of the chamber, the altar stood broken and battered, its once flawless surface now marred with deep fissures. Yet the shards of the obsidian orb scattered across its face glowed, faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light that flickered, uncertainly between hope and despair, from the enveloping darkness. The guardian materialized, not the massive, terrifying figure I had faced before, but a fragile, flickering specter, its form wreathed in shadows that twisted and writhed like living smoke, the fractured mask reflecting the wavering light in fractured shards that seemed to pulse with sorrow and warning. Its voice was a whisper that echoed through the vast chamber like a mournful wind, sweeping through the trees, carrying a message heavy with centuries of pain and yearning. Break the cycle, or be consumed. My limbs trembled under the crushing weight of history, the burden of countless souls who had tried to defy the darkness and failed. Their suffering etched into the very foundation of the shrine, embedded in every stone beneath my feet. With trembling hands, I reached toward the scattered fragments of the orb, its cold, smooth surface biting into my palms as a flood of visions crashed through my mind, faces of the lost, their expressions frozen in anguish and hope, their stories woven into an endless tapestry of despair and courage. The chamber seemed to breathe around me, the walls pulsing in time with the rising crescendo of whispers, a chaotic symphony of sorrow, accusation, and plea that threatened to shatter my fragile hold on reality. Summoning every ounce of strength and will, I focused on the faint, flickering light burning within my soul, the fragile ember of defiance that had carried me through the abyss, and let it blaze forth, pouring my essence into the shards, igniting them with a fierce brilliance that bathed the room in radiant light. Shadows recoiled in retreat. The faces in the murals softened into peaceful smiles, and the guardian's form began to dissolve, unraveling into beams of pure, cleansing light that ascended like liberated spirits, a silent farewell to the centuries of torment. The oppressive weight lifted as if a heavy shroud had been removed, replaced by a serene calm that filled every corner of the chamber, the echoes of freedom reverberating through the sacred halls. The ghostly faces of the lost drifted upward, dissolving into shimmering beams that rose to the heavens beyond the shattered walls, their anguished cries replaced by a chorus of liberation and hope. Exhausted beyond measure yet unbroken in spirit, I stepped toward the threshold, greeted by the soft embrace of dawn's first light filtering through the dense canopy outside. The forest alive with renewed whispers of promise and new beginnings. Though scars marked my body and memories haunted my mind, I carried within me an unquenchable flame, a beacon of hope and resilience forged in the crucible of darkness. As I walked away from the shrine, its silhouette fading into the mist and shadow, I understood that the battle between light and dark, despair and redemption, was not over. It was an eternal struggle etched into the very soul of the land, and one that I was now bound to carry forward. The night's shadows might linger at the edges of my path, but they no longer held dominion over me, for in embracing the darkness, I had found the strength to become my own light, and with that light burning steadfast within me, I was ready to face whatever dawn awaited. The moon hung low and heavy in the night sky, a pale guardian watching silently as I retraced the twisted, narrow forest path that led inexorably back to the shrine, a place whose shadows now felt less like mere absence of light and more like sentient entities waiting patiently to reclaim what was theirs. The night air was thick with oppressing stillness, so profound that even the faint rustle of leaves beneath my cautious footsteps seemed amplified into an ominous drumbeat echoing through the ancient trees, as if the very forest itself were holding its breath in anticipation. Every step forward was laden with memories too heavy to bear, echoes of the lost souls trapped within those cursed walls. the insidious pulse of the glowing runes etched deep into my flesh, like a mark of ownership, and the lingering, haunting image of the Guardian's fractured mask, forever seared into my mind's eye as a symbol of my tangled fate. The village I once called home had long since faded into a hazy, distant memory swallowed by shadows and the relentless march of time, leaving only this path, winding like a serpent through gnarled roots that grasped at my feet like skeletal hands, and moss-covered stones slick beneath the weight of centuries, each step drawing me closer to the locus of a darkness that had irrevocably altered my soul. As the shrine's silhouette emerged through the creeping mist, it loomed like a sleeping leviathan, scarred and broken, the torii gate leaning at a precarious angle, its ancient runes flickering faintly as if fighting against the inevitable decay. The air grew inexplicably colder, heavier, as if the shrine itself exhaled a breath long held, thick with the scent of incense burned 1,000 years ago, and the silent tears of forgotten prayers. Crossing beneath the gate no longer felt like a reckless trespass, but rather a surrender to a destiny entwined with that place, an unspoken pact inked in the bones of the earth and whispered in the winds that had witnessed generations pass in silence. Inside, the familiar darkness engulfed me like a shroud, the dim glow of fading runes lighting a labyrinthine path through corridors that twisted and stretched beyond reason, as if the shrine's walls were alive, breathing slowly in time with the heartbeat of some slumbering ancient beast. The murals adorning those walls, long faded and peeling, seemed to stir with a life of their own, faces emerging from the cracked plaster, sorrowful eyes turning to watch my every movement with mournful vigilance, their silent lamentations weaving a tapestry of pain and loss that wrapped around me with suffocating intimacy. Each step I took echoed through the cavernous space, reverberating like a heartbeat that connected the living to the dead, a reminder of the endless cycle of entrapment and despair that bound us all. From the shifting shadows emerged a figure that seemed less a monstrous guardian and more a fractured remnant of something once whole, a spectral silhouette, its form wavering like smoke caught in a sudden breeze, its mask cracked and broken, but eyes still shimmering with a fragile, desperate hope. It extended a trembling hand in silent invitation, a plea without words, beseeching me to break the curse that had ensnared us both in this timeless prison. The chamber quivered as ancient magic stirred, the runes along the walls flaring in response, igniting with a fierce, almost desperate light that chased away the lingering gloom and filled the space with an otherworldly glow. I understood then that this place was more than a prison. It was a crucible where the forces of light and darkness clashed in an eternal struggle, where redemption and damnation hung in a delicate balance. With a trembling but resolute heart, I stepped forward, ready to face the perilous path ahead, one that promised no easy answers but held the fragile hope of liberation from the shadows that had haunted me for so long. My fingers brushed the cracked mask as I reached out, feeling a surge of energy pulse through my veins, binding me once more to the shrine's fate, yet also granting a renewed strength born from the shared pain and hope of the countless souls who had come before me. The Guardian's voice, now a whisper carried on the breath of the ancient stones, urged me onward, reminding me that only by embracing the darkness within could I hope to find the light beyond. The walls seemed to close in, alive with the memories of suffering and love, loss and sacrifice, weaving a tapestry of existence that bound us all in ways beyond mortal comprehension. And as I stood at the altar, bathed in the ethereal glow of the runes and the fading echoes of the lost, I knew that the journey was far from over, that the final confrontation awaited in the depths below, where the shrine's darkest secrets lay buried beneath layers of shadow and silence, and only the bravest could hope to emerge unbroken. The weight of this realization settled over me like a shroud, yet within the darkness, a single, unwavering spark of courage flickered a promise that even in the deepest night, light could find a way to survive. The deeper I ventured into the shrine's bowels, the more the world around me warped and twisted, the air growing thick with a suffocating presence that seemed to seep into my very bones, pressing upon my chest like an invisible weight that stole my breath and wove icy tendrils through my veins. The dim glow of the ancient runes carved along the walls flickered erratically, as if battling an unseen tempest, their light struggling to hold back the encroaching darkness that spilled like ink from unseen cracks in the stone. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsating with a slow, mournful rhythm, as if the shrine was alive, a slumbering colossus awakening from a centuries-long dream, hungry and restless. With every cautious step, my senses were assaulted by whispers, fractured voices carried on the stale air, some pleading, others accusing, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and rage that tangled itself around my mind, threatening to unravel. The fragile thread of my sanity. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision, coalescing into twisted forms, faces contorted with anguish, hands reaching out with desperate need, only to vanish when met with my gaze, leaving behind a lingering chill that raced down my spine. As I pressed onward, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, the floor beneath slick with a thin sheen of water that reflected the ghostly glow of countless runes, etched deep into the stone, their light swirling and pulsing like the heartbeat of a dying star. At the chamber's center stood a monolithic altar, scarred and cracked, upon which rested a dark, obsidian orb that seemed to swallow light whole, a black sun that radiated an eerie coldness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, voices overlapping in a dissonant symphony of anguish and warning, echoing from every corner of the chamber, filling the vast space with an oppressive weight that threatened to crush my resolve. Suddenly, the orb pulsed with a violent surge of energy, sending ripples through the water that lapped at the altar's base, and from its depths emerged the spectral form of the guardian, no longer fractured but whole, its presence overwhelming and immense, limbs elongated and draped in ethereal shadow, its once cracked mask now whole and glowing with a sinister, pulsating light. The guardian's voice thundered through the chamber, a sound both beautiful and terrible, reverberating through stone and spirit alike. You have come far, but the true test lies ahead. Will you embrace the darkness within or be consumed by it? My heart hammered as I faced the embodiment of the shrine's will, the very force that had bound and broken countless souls before me. And though fear clawed at the edges of my mind, a strange determination settled within me, a fierce, unyielding desire to defy the fate that had claimed so many. The chamber began to shift and ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond, the runes along the walls igniting into blinding arcs of light that traced ancient symbols of protection and power, weaving a web of energy that both trapped and empowered. And I felt the weight of history pressing down on me, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the prayers whispered in desperation across centuries. With trembling hands, I reached toward the obsidian orb, feeling its icy surface pulse beneath my fingertips like the heart of the shrine itself. And as I touched it, visions flooded my mind, lives intertwined with this place, stories of courage and despair, the endless cycle of those who dared to challenge the darkness and those who were lost to it. The guardian stepped closer, its form blurring and shifting, and I realized that this was no longer a battle of flesh and blood but one of wills, of light and shadow, of hope and despair intertwined in a deadly dance. with every ounce of strength I could muster. I summoned the spark of light that had survived the depths of this nightmare, focusing it into a brilliant beacon within my chest that pulsed in time with the glowing runes that now traced my skin, and the chamber responded, the shadows recoiling as if burned by the purity of my resolve. The guardian roared, a sound that shattered the silence and sent shards of darkness scattering like broken glass. But I stood firm, the light within me growing brighter, a blazing star against the encroaching night. And with a final, desperate cry, I poured that light into the orb, watching as its dark surface cracked and splintered, releasing a torrent of shimmering energy that surged through the chamber, illuminating every shadow, breaking every chain, and freeing every trapped soul bound within these ancient walls. The whispers softened into sighs of relief. Faces once twisted in torment now bathed in radiant peace, and the guardian's form began to dissolve into the light it could no longer contain. A final farewell whispered on the winds of eternity. Exhausted but victorious, I sank to my knees amidst the fading glow, the oppressive weight lifting from my chest, replaced by a profound sense of release and renewal. And as dawn's first light crept through the shattered windows of the shrine, I knew the nightmare was over, that the cycle had been broken, and that with courage and hope, even the darkest shadows could be overcome. The moment that awaited me was vast and breathless, stretched out like a fragile thread between two worlds, one of shadow and torment, the other of light and liberation. And as the first tentative fingers of dawn began to seep through the broken lattice of ancient stone and crumbling wood above, casting fractured, golden rays that scattered like scattered jewels across the cold, scarred floor, I found myself standing at the crossroads of eternity, my body trembling not only from exhaustion, but from the unbearable weight of what had come before and the fragile hope of what might still be. My limbs felt heavy with the residue of the shrine's ancient magic, the glowing runes etched deeply into my skin pulsing faintly, a lingering reminder of the dark pact I had entered, and the battles I had fought within those haunted walls. Yet, amidst the fatigue and lingering pain, a small but fierce ember of defiance stirred within me, a beacon of light born not from ignorance of the darkness, but from having stared into it and refused to blink. The chamber that had once felt like a suffocating prison now shimmered with a gentle, otherworldly radiance, soft hues of pale gold and silver illuminating every crack and crevice, as though the very stones were breathing anew, exhaling centuries of sorrow and despair to make room for peace and renewal. Around the shattered altar where the obsidian orb had lain, the scattered fragments of the guardian's mask glowed softly, their edges alive with the faint luminescence of countless souls, once bound and now freed souls that had long yearned for release, now drifting upwards like celestial lanterns ascending toward the heavens beyond the shrine's ancient walls. The once chaotic and tormenting whispers that had filled the chamber had softened into sighs of gratitude and relief, weaving through the air as gentle melodies that touched my ears and settled upon my soul like a balm for wounds I had only begun to understand. The ghostly faces of the lost, those ethereal phantoms whose eyes had once burned with pain and accusation, now smiled softly, their forms dissolving like morning mist kissed by the sun's gentle warmth, their voices no longer cries of despair but whispers of hope and eternal rest. I felt the presence of those freed souls envelop me in an invisible embrace, a profound connection spanning lifetimes and realms, binding me to their courage and compassion and reminding me that my journey had transcended my own fears and failures to become part of something far greater. As I rose unsteadily to my feet, the crushing burden of the curse lifted from my shoulders like a dark cloud breaking apart, replaced by a luminous sense of peace that filled the hollow spaces within me and illuminated even the darkest recesses of my heart. The shrine itself seemed to breathe a final sigh of release, its ancient stones resonating with the echoes of freedom that now pulsed through its sacred halls, the oppressive shadows receding like tides drawn back into the abyss. Moving slowly toward the threshold, I cast one last lingering glance upon the altar, now a glowing testament to resilience and redemption, where the obsidian orb lay shattered into a constellation of radiant fragments, each one carrying the light of a soul once lost and now reborn. The forest beyond beckoned with the soft caress of dawn's early light, the mist weaving delicate patterns among ancient trunks and vibrant foliage, whispering promises of renewal and new beginnings, inviting me to step from the darkness of the past into the uncertain light of tomorrow. Though the scars of my ordeal marked my body and memory indelibly, I carried within me a newfound strength, a fierce resolve forged in the crucible of shadow and flame, a guiding flame that would light my path through whatever trials awaited beyond this moment. And as I walked away from the shrine, its silhouette retreating slowly into the mist-shrouded woods, a ghostly relic of sorrow and hope intertwined, I understood with unwavering clarity that while the nightmare was over, the true journey was only beginning, a lifelong battle to nurture the fragile light within, to face the lingering shadows that haunted the edges of my soul, and to carry forward the enduring hope that even in the deepest night, dawn will inevitably break, bringing with it the promise of healing, of courage, and of freedom. The forest around me lay in eerie silence, shadows stretching long and thin beneath a moon that barely pierced the thick canopy overhead, as if nature itself mourned the curse that clung to this forsaken place. My footsteps faltered on the winding path leading away from the shrine's ruins, every breath heavy with the weight of memories too painful to forget, but too real to deny. The faint glow of the runes branded upon my skin pulsed in rhythm with the distant heartbeat of the earth itself, a relentless reminder that though I had escaped the physical confines of the shrine, its dark grasp had embedded itself deep within my soul. Behind me, the shattered remnants of the altar glimmered faintly through the mist, an ethereal beacon for the restless souls still tethered to that cursed ground. Their whispers like the soft echo of a forgotten nightmare carried on the cold night wind. With each step forward, the world around me seemed to warp and bend, the line between reality and shadow blurring into an indistinct haze that unsettled even the firmest grasp of my mind. Faces appeared and vanished in the periphery of my vision, ghostly, translucent, a silent procession of the lost, their hollow eyes filled with sorrow and silent pleas, reaching out as if begging for a savior who might never come. The forest itself seemed alive with whispers, secrets tangled among the rustling leaves and the groan of ancient branches, carrying the weight of ages and the unspoken truths that had bound this place in eternal night. As I stumbled onward, the memories of the shrine flooded my senses, its suffocating darkness, the spectral guardian's fractured mask, the obsidian orb that had cracked and shattered beneath my trembling hands, and the fragile light that had momentarily pierced the shadows to set the trapped souls free. But that light had not been without cost. The burden of survival pressed down like a shackle upon my heart, and the curse had left its mark beyond the physical scars that marred my flesh. I was changed, forever tethered to the shrine's fate, a reluctant guardian of its dark legacy and its fragile hope. The runes etched into my skin glowed softly, a living map of pain and redemption, their light flickering like a fragile candle in the encroaching gloom. And though dawn's promise was distant, I could feel the endless night reaching for me still, a relentless tide that sought to reclaim what I had fought so hard to escape. I paused beneath a towering oak, the bark rough beneath my trembling fingers, and looked up at the fractured moon, its pale light filtering through the tangled branches, like the ghostly fingers of fate itself. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying a faint echo of the guardian's voice, soft, mournful, yet filled with an undying plea for release and understanding. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, the fear, the despair, the fleeting moments of hope and courage that had defined my journey. And I knew that the path ahead would be long and uncertain. The curse was not bound by walls or stones, but lived within me, a shadow lurking at the edges of my thoughts, a constant reminder that freedom was not a destination but a struggle. Yet within that struggle, I found a strange solace, a reason to keep walking, to keep fighting the darkness both outside and within, to honor the souls I had freed and to carry forward the fragile light that had once seemed impossible to ignite. As the first tendrils of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the sky with hues of soft pink and gold, I took a tentative step forward, leaving behind the shattered shrine and its eternal night, but carrying with me a heart forever changed, a spirit forever marked, and a resolve that no shadow could ever extinguish. The deeper I ventured into the endless expanse of night that stretched beyond the shrine's ruins, the more the boundaries between the world I knew and the shadows that now haunted my very being began to blur, merging into a surreal landscape where memories and nightmares intertwined so seamlessly that I could no longer trust the whispers in my own mind. Each step I took was weighted not only by exhaustion but by the creeping realization that the darkness I had escaped was never truly behind me and had rooted itself in the deepest parts of my soul, an unyielding presence that pulsed in rhythm with the glowing runes etched across my skin, their faint light flickering like a heartbeat both alien and intimate. Around me, the forest whispered secrets old as time, the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the wind carrying voices that were not my own ancient lamentations from those who had been consumed by the shrine's curse, their sorrow and rage bleeding through the veil that separated the living from the lost. As I moved forward, the landscape itself seemed to shift and distort, shadows lengthening and twisting into shapes both familiar and grotesque. Faces of the lost flickered at the edges of my vision, translucent, mournful, their hollow eyes reaching out with silent pleas that tore at the fabric of my sanity. The weight of their collective grief pressed upon me like a physical force, sapping my strength and threatening to pull me back into the abyss from which I had barely escaped. Yet amid the suffocating darkness, a flicker of defiance sparked within me, a fragile light that refused to be extinguished no matter how fierce the night grew. I recalled the guardian's fractured mask and the shattered obsidian orb, symbols of a curse broken, yet not fully undone. And I knew that my path forward would require not only courage but a willingness to confront the shadows within myself, as well as those without. The runes on my skin pulsed brighter, illuminating the twisted path ahead as I pressed on, my breath ragged and heart pounding like a drumbeat against the silence. The forest around me grew denser, the trees looming like silent sentinels guarding secrets too terrible to speak aloud, their branches entwining overhead to form a canopy that choked out the pale moonlight, plunging me into a deeper darkness that felt alive, breathing, watching, waiting. As I stumbled through the underbrush, a sudden chill swept over me, and the shadows parted to reveal a narrow clearing bathed in a spectral glow, where the air shimmered with an unnatural energy that made my skin crawl and my senses reel. At the clearing's center stood a solitary figure, a reflection of the guardian but twisted and warped, its form flickering like a broken projection, eyes blazing with an intensity that burned away the edges of reality. It spoke without words, its presence a force that pressed upon my mind with the weight of centuries, revealing truths too vast and terrible to fully comprehend. The darkness was not merely a curse to be broken or a prison to be escaped. It was a living force, hungry and eternal, entwined with the very fabric of this land and my own soul. To sever its hold would demand a sacrifice greater than I had yet imagined, a confrontation not only with the entity that had bound so many, but with the shadows lurking within my own heart, the fears and regrets that threatened to consume me from inside. The figure extended a hand, a silent challenge and invitation, and I realized that the true test of my journey was yet to come. Drawing upon the fragile light burning within, I stepped forward, ready to face the darkness and the deepest fears. It stirred, knowing that the battle for my soul and for all those trapped by the shrine's curse would be fought not in the shadows without, but in the shadowed recesses of my own being. The forest held its breath as I crossed the threshold into this final confrontation, where light and darkness, hope and despair, life and death intertwined in a desperate dance, and where the fate of many would be decided by the strength of a single, fragile human heart. The air was thick and heavy around me, as though the very atmosphere conspired to weigh down my every breath. Each inhale a labor, each step forward a battle fought against invisible chains that threatened to drag me back into the endless night I had so desperately sought to escape. The forest around me blurred and twisted, shadows stretching and folding into shapes both monstrous and mournful. The faces of those lost to the shrine flickering at the edges of my vision, silent witnesses to my faltering resolve, their hollow eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow, accusation, and fragile hope. Every pulse of the glowing runes etched into my skin throbbed in rhythm with my pounding heart, a living map of pain and resilience that reminded me that though I carried the curse, I was not yet consumed by it. As I moved deeper into the tangled woods, a cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, murmuring secrets older than time itself, promises of redemption and warnings of despair intertwined in a haunting symphony that echoed within my very soul. The ground beneath my feet shifted unpredictably, roots twisting and grasping like the fingers of the past trying to pull me under, and the moonlight filtering through the canopy seemed to dim and flicker as though hesitant to witness the final act of a story written in shadows and blood. Ahead, the shattered shrine rose like a ghost from the mist, its broken gates a threshold between worlds, beckoning me to cross once more into the heart of darkness. With a deep, shuddering breath, I stepped forward, the weight of every choice, every sacrifice, every whispered prayer pressing upon me like a tide threatening to drown. Yet within that crushing pressure, a spark of defiance blazed fiercely, a promise that even in the deepest shadows, light could find a way to survive. As I passed beneath the torii gate, the fragments of the Guardian's mask lay scattered across the ground, glowing faintly with the souls they had once ensnared, their fractured edges shimmering like stars caught in a dark sea. The chamber inside was awash in spectral light, runes pulsating with renewed vigor as the whispers of the lost rose once more, a chorus of voices that both comforted and challenged me, urging me toward the altar where the obsidian orb had been broken, but whose power still lingered in the very stones beneath my feet. I approached the altar with trembling hands, feeling the pulse of ancient magic thrumming through the air. And as my fingers brushed the cold stone, the chamber seemed to breathe, the walls rippling like water disturbed by a stone's throw. The ghostly faces of the lost swirled around me, their eyes shining with an ethereal glow as they reached out in silent supplication. And I realized then that this was not just a place of imprisonment, but a crucible of transformation, a place where the darkness was not merely to be fought but embraced, understood, and transcended. The guardian's voice, now a gentle murmur, echoed through the chamber, a plea woven with hope and sorrow. You have walked through darkness and pain, but only by embracing both can you truly be free. With resolve hardening within me, I drew upon the faint light within my soul, focusing it into a brilliant beacon that pierced the shadows and illuminated the chamber's deepest corners. The runes blazed in response, their glow intensifying until the entire shrine was bathed in a radiant light that chased away the darkness, unraveling the curse that had held so many captive for centuries. The faces of the lost smiled softly as they faded into beams of pure light, ascending like lanterns to the heavens. Their anguished cries transformed into songs of liberation. The guardian, once a towering force of despair, now appeared as a fragile spirit, its fractured mask dissolving into shimmering particles that danced upon the light's gentle breeze. Exhausted yet unbroken, I stepped through the threshold, leaving behind the shrine's shadow but carrying with me its lessons and scars. The forest greeted me with the gentle touch of dawn's first light, mist curling softly around ancient trees, whispering promises of new beginnings and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Though the journey had left its mark upon me in flesh, mind, and soul, I knew that the true victory lay not in escaping the darkness but in carrying its lessons as a light to guide me through whatever lay ahead. And as I walked away from the shrine, its silhouette fading into the morning mist, I understood that the night's shadows would always linger at the edges of my path, but they would no longer hold dominion over me, for in embracing the darkness, I had found the power to become my own light, and with that light burning steady within me, I was ready to face whatever dawn would bring.